I remember the exact sound of her laughter when she read the letter sharp, metallic, the kind that cuts through silence like a knife. My daughter-in-law stood at the dining table, my son beside her, both frozen as their eyes scanned the last line of my will. For a moment, I thought the room itself stopped breathing. Then she said it, the same phrase that had carved itself into my memory months before. Dead weight. That's what you are. And just like that, justice finally tasted sweet. But before we reach that day, you need to understand what led me there. How a man like me, who built his family with bare hands and faith, became invisible in his own home. I was never born into comfort. My first tools weren't silver spoons. They were wrenches, hammers, and the rough smell of engine oil. By the time I was 19, I'd already spent more hours under car hoods than most men spend in classrooms. When I married my late wife, Helen, we promised each other one thing. Whatever we earned, we'd build something that could carry our son further than we ever went. And for 35 years, that's exactly what we did. We started a small auto repair shop in our garage, back when customers paid in crumpled bills and jars of coins. Helen handled the books. I handled the grease. We didn't take vacations. We didn't eat out. We built, we saved, and we believed. Every Friday night, we'd sit on the porch, look at the ledger, and she'd whisper, "Someday he'll thank us." Our son, Bright, charming, ambitious, did thank us once. At graduation, he hugged me and said, "Dad, I'll make you proud." He did. For a while, he went to college on a scholarship, came back with business ideas, modern logos, and a fiancé who smelled like luxury perfume and spoke like she'd swallowed a rule book for social climbing. At first, I tried to welcome her. Helen, too. We wanted to believe that love would soften her edges. But edges don't soften when they think they're sharper than everyone around them. My daughter-in-law, Claire, treated kindness like a favor she might extend if it didn't inconvenience her. When Helen passed away 5 years later, Claire didn't cry. She organized. "Let's clear the house quickly," she said. "It's too big for one person." One person. After 40 years of marriage, that's what I'd become, one person, reduced to a logistical problem. I didn't argue. I just packed Helen's things quietly, room by room. Each folded sweater felt like another goodbye. They moved me into their guest house until we decide what's next. It sounded temporary, but I knew what it meant. A waiting room for obsolescence. At first, I tried to help mowing the lawn, fixing leaky faucets, cooking on Sundays, but Claire made it clear she didn't want help. "You should rest," she said, smiling that polite smile that hides contempt. "You've done enough." Rest, what they meant was, stay out of sight. The guest house was a neat little box behind their modern home, white walls, sterile air, and windows that faced the fence. My world shrank to that rectangle of backyard grass. The hum of the pool filter was my only conversation partner most days. Every evening, I'd see through their glass doors the dinners, the laughter, the way my son pulled out chairs and poured wine like he'd forgotten the smell of the garage that raised him. Sometimes my grandson, Ethan, would sneak out after bedtime to visit me. He'd sit on the couch eating cookies I wasn't supposed to give him. "Grandpa," he'd whisper, "why does Mom always roll her eyes when you talk?" I'd smile and say, "Because grown-ups forget that love doesn't need translation." He didn't understand. Neither did my son, apparently. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I'd overheard them talking in the kitchen. Claire's voice, cold, sharp, as usual, cut through the hum of the refrigerator. "He's draining us." "Mark," she said, "electric bills, medicine, food. Your father's basically living here rent-free. It's time to face it. He's dead weight." There it was again. Dead weight. I remember the coffee mug slipping from my hand and shattering on the tiles. The sound drew them both to the doorway. For a second, we all just stared at each other. My son opened his mouth to speak, but Claire was faster. "Dad, you shouldn't sneak around like that," she said, her tone rehearsed. "I wasn't sneaking," I replied quietly. Just hearing the truth, my son looked down. No denial. No defense, just silence. That silence burned louder than her words. The night after hearing those words, I didn't sleep. The house was silent, but silence isn't peace. It's an echo chamber of everything you've tried to bury. The clock ticked so loudly it felt like a heartbeat I didn't own anymore. I sat in the armchair by the window, Helen's photograph resting on my lap. She was smiling in that picture, her hair tucked behind her ears, her eyes full of that impossible kind of hope women like her were born with. I brushed my thumb over the frame and whispered, "You were right, Helen. Love doesn't vanish. It just changes shape, sometimes into disappointment." A storm was brewing outside, the kind that shakes the window panes and rattles the soul. Rain fell in rhythmic bursts, like applause for an act I didn't know I'd performed. And somewhere between the thunder and my own thoughts, I realized something chilling. They didn't even hate me enough to argue. Hatred at least means you matter. Indifference means you're already gone. The following morning, I forced myself to keep routine. Old habits are stubborn. They survive long after dignity starts to fade. I brewed coffee, the same way Helen used to, 2 spoons of sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and that faint vanilla smell she loved. But when I poured it into the mug, it didn't taste right. It tasted like something sacred had been boiled away. The guest house mirror caught my reflection, stooped shoulders, weathered skin, and eyes that looked older than the rest of me. I used to think wrinkles were the lines of experience. Now they looked more like the signatures of loss. Later that day, Ethan came running in with his usual grin, holding a drawing. He was 6, maybe 7, but already had that curious spark that reminded me of myself at his age. "Look, Grandpa," he said, unfolding a crumpled paper. It was a sketch of a house big, with trees and a little stick figure in front, holding a cane. "That's you," he said proudly. I smiled, pretending not to notice that the other stick figures, his parents, were drawn smaller. "Far away near the fence line. Why are they so tiny?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Because they don't come visit you much." I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let him see it. Instead, I ruffled his hair and said, "That's okay, kiddo. Sometimes people forget to visit the parts of life that matter most." Over the next few weeks, the air between me and the main house grew heavier. Claire rarely looked at me anymore, except to correct something. "Don't let Ethan eat sweets this late," or "Could you not leave your tools near the porch?" Every word from her mouth carried the perfume of control. "My son," he tried, in small ways, a nod at breakfast, a short conversation about weather or bills, but his eyes were elsewhere. He'd become fluent in avoidance. I began to understand what it means to fade in plain sight. You can sit 3 feet from your family and still be a ghost at the table. Sometimes I'd watch them through the glass doors at night. Claire scrolling her phone, my son tapping away on his laptop, Ethan playing quietly until someone told him it was bedtime. It looked like a painting of modern life, beautiful on the surface, hollow underneath. One afternoon, I walked into the garage, the only place that still smelled like me. The air was heavy with motor oil, metal dust, and memories. In the corner sat my old toolbox, still engraved with my initials. I opened it, and inside lay Helen's small notebook. She used to write quotes and thoughts in it, little reminders she'd leave me to find later. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at one that read, "People don't fail when they fall. They fail when they refuse to stand again." The handwriting was shaky, from her final months, but the words hit like lightning. I sat there for hours, just tracing each letter, and that's when a seed was planted. Not revenge, not yet. Something softer. A test. A way to measure the heartbeats of those who claim to love me. Days blurred. I started pretending to be more frail than I was. At first, it wasn't for manipulation. It was a mirror, to see what love still existed when I stopped offering anything in return. If kindness dies when there's no benefit, it was never kindness to begin with. I began coughing more, walking slower, sighing deliberately. Claire barely noticed. My son looked concerned, but distracted. Only Ethan reacted. "Grandpa, are you sick?" he asked one evening, his voice trembling. I smiled weakly. "Just tired, buddy," he frowned. "I can bring you juice. Mom says juice makes everything better." He ran to the kitchen and returned with a small glass, spilling half of it on the carpet. But the look on his face, pure worry, was worth more than every apology I'd ever wanted from his parents. Children see truth without filters. Adults, meanwhile, learn to decorate lies. The pretense slowly became performance. I stopped shaving, left pills scattered on the table, moved slower than my joints required. Each gesture, each cough, was a quiet note in the symphony I was composing. Then one morning, I went further. At breakfast, I told them my doctor had called me in for tests. Claire's eyes barely lifted from her phone. "Oh," she said flatly. "Is it serious?" I shrugged. "He wants to run a few scans. Could be something." My son looked at me with that hollow concern people use when they're deciding whether empathy fits their schedule. After a long silence, Claire said, "Well, we'll manage. Whatever happens." I almost laughed. They'd manage. That was the word she used when the car battery died or the Wi-Fi went out. She said it like I was an inconvenience to troubleshoot. That evening, I sat in my room writing. Not a real will not yet, just a draft. I wrote details, dates, assets, and a few cryptic lines that would later mean everything. I wrote, "What is given in love is tested in silence. What is taken for granted will return in disguise." And at the bottom, I signed it not my full name, just my initials. The loneliness deepened in those weeks, but strangely, it became my ally. Pain sharpens the mind when you stop resisting it. I learned to watch people the way a craftsman watches metal under heat, waiting to see where it bends, where it breaks. One night, while Ethan watched cartoons on the floor, Claire came in holding her phone. "Mark," she said to my son, "we should talk about the house." He looked up, wary. "What about it?" "If your father's condition worsens, we might need to consider a care home." "I don't think I can handle this much longer." My heart sank. Ethan turned to her, his little eyes wide. "But Mom, Grandpa's nice. He can stay here." She frowned. "Go to your room, Ethan." He didn't move. He looked at me instead, confused. And that's when I realized I wasn't just losing my son. I was about to lose my grandson's faith in what family means. That night, I decided something. I wouldn't fight them with anger. I'd fight them with reflection. If they couldn't see their hearts in a mirror, I'd build them one. It took me a week to refine the plan in my mind. Every detail, every emotional lever, every truth I wanted them to face. I called my old friend Raymond, a retired lawyer who owed me more than one favor, and asked him to visit discreetly. He came 2 days later, carrying his usual smell of cigars and secrets. We sat in the garden, the only place where Claire wouldn't eavesdrop. "You want to fake a terminal diagnosis?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Not fake," I replied. "Simulate, enough to see who still remembers how to care." Raymond stared at me for a long time. "You're serious?" As serious as the son who forgot his father. He exhaled smoke through his nose. "You always had a flair for drama." "It's not drama, Ray. It's justice without punishment." He agreed. Reluctantly, we drafted a document, a false will, legally meaningless but convincing enough to stir greed. And at the end of it, I added one clause that made Raymond chuckle. "To whoever shows unconditional care in my final month, the estate shall pass in entirety." He looked at me, eyes narrowed. "You know this will drive them mad." "That's the point," I said quietly. "Sometimes madness is the shortest road to truth." Over the next few days, I began rehearsing the role. The weak movements, the subtle coughs, the way a man's voice changes when he's running out of time. I practiced expressions in the mirror: pain, exhaustion, grace. It wasn't pride that drove me. It was precision. And through it all, only one person noticed something was off. Ethan. He'd sneak in at night, placing a blanket over my knees or leaving small toys on my table. "Grandpa," he whispered one evening, "if you die, can I still visit your room?" I swallowed hard. "You won't have to, buddy. I'll still visit you in the stories you tell." He smiled sleepily. "Then I'll tell a lot." I held him close, realizing he was the last thread connecting me to the world that still had meaning. When the day finally came to announce my illness, I felt oddly calm. I gathered them all in the living room. Claire looked mildly annoyed. Her phone buzzed twice during my opening words. My son sat stiffly, waiting for instructions like he always did when emotions were involved. Ethan sat on the floor, hugging his toy truck. I took a deep breath. "The doctors say it's not good news," I began. "They found something in the scans." Claire's brows arched slightly. "Something?" "Something terminal," I said softly. "They're giving me a few months, at best." A moment of silence followed. Then Claire, ever the actress, placed a hand on her chest. "Oh no, that's awful." Her voice carried no tremor. My son looked lost, but not devastated, more like someone trying to recall how empathy works. I continued, "I've made arrangements for my estate, but more importantly, I'd like to spend my remaining time with family." Ethan's face lit up. "Does that mean you'll stay here forever?" I smiled. "Maybe just long enough to see who remembers me when I'm gone." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt both guilt and peace. Guilt for the lie. Peace for the truth it might reveal. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, whispering through the leaves like Helen's voice. "You're not being cruel. You're being honest." I closed my eyes and whispered back, "Then let honesty do what love couldn't." And that's how the test began. It's strange how quickly pity wears thin, when it isn't. Real. At first, they tried to appear caring. Claire cooked 1 or 2 dinners. My son called me Dad more often, as if repetition could rebuild the bridge that years of neglect had burned. But soon, the mask began to slip. 3 weeks into my performance, the house was already shifting. Claire complained about the smell of my herbal tea. My son grew distant again, retreating into his laptop like he was hiding from the truth. And the only one who stayed constant was Ethan, who brought drawings, blankets, and tiny moments of sincerity that kept me from losing faith in the reason behind it all. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen again. The door was half open, the voices low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Mark, this can't go on forever," Claire said, her tone dripping with fatigue. "Your father's doctor appointments, his special meals, the bills. It's too much." "He's dying, Claire," my son replied, his voice hesitant, like a man still trying to sound good while agreeing to something bad. "Exactly," she said quickly. "So why invest in what's already ending? We could use that money to fix the patio or start saving for Ethan's school." There was silence. Then my son said quietly, "You're right. 2 words. That's all it took for my last bit of respect for him to fade." I stepped away before they could see me. My hands trembled, not from the act I was playing, but from the rage that was real this time. It wasn't loud rage. It was the kind that settles into your chest and simmers until it turns into decision. That night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old blanket Helen had knitted years ago. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled like rain. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, every birthday I had worked through, every dream I had postponed so that my son could live easier. And now I was a burden, dead weight. The words kept replaying until they stopped hurting. Once pain becomes familiar, it becomes instruction. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Small notes about how they behaved, what they said, what they ignored. I wanted to see their truth written down in ink. On Monday, I wrote, "Claire forgot to bring breakfast. Said she was late for yoga." On Wednesday, "Son left for work early. No goodbye." Friday, Ethan visited, drew a sun and said, "Grandpa, you're the light." That one I circled twice. The pattern became clear. The colder they got, the warmer Ethan became. The child had no agenda, no fear of losing inheritance, no calculation, just a natural instinct to love what was kind to him. One evening, when Claire forgot to call me for dinner, Ethan snuck into my room with 2 slices of bread and a banana. "Here, Grandpa," he said softly. "Mom forgot you," I smiled, hiding the sting in my chest. "That's all right, buddy. You remembered me, and that's enough." He grinned, missing a front tooth. "Then I'm winning." I laughed quietly, the first real laugh in weeks. He had no idea how true those words would become. As the days passed, I started adding small layers to the illusion. I left a medical report on the counter, one that Raymond helped me craft carefully. It mentioned stage 4 complications and rapid deterioration. The words looked terrifying on paper. They were designed too. Claire found it first. I heard her sharp gasp from the kitchen. "Mark," she called, "did you see this?" He walked in, and I could imagine his face, the same nervous half-frown he wore whenever life demanded conscience. She handed him the paper. "He's worse than he said. We should probably contact the lawyer." That was my cue. I stepped out quietly, leaning on my cane like a man who could barely stand. "There's time for that later," I said softly. They both froze. Claire forced a smile. "Of course, Dad. I was just worried about the logistics." Logistics. Even dying was an event she wanted to schedule between her manicure and her online shopping. Later that night, I took Ethan to the backyard. The stars were bright, scattered across the dark sky like a secret map. "Grandpa, are you really going to heaven?" he asked suddenly. The question hit harder than any insult ever could. "Why do you ask that?" I said gently. "Because Mom said you'll be with Grandma soon." I looked up at the stars and nodded slowly. "Maybe. But heaven isn't just up there, kiddo. Sometimes heaven is when you're loved right here." He thought for a second. "Then I'll build heaven for you." I had to turn away. My throat burned with emotions too heavy to speak. That night, I wrote another note. "Ethan passes the test without even knowing there is one. By the second week, My condition became the center of conversation, but not in the way it should have been. Claire began inviting her friends over, casually mentioning my illness like a social prop. "He's been so strong," she said one afternoon while pouring wine. "We're doing everything we can, but it's hard, you know?" Her friend patted her shoulder and said, "You're such a saint." A saint. I nearly laughed out loud from the next room. That same evening, she whispered to my son about selling the guest house after I was gone. My son didn't argue. He just sighed, as if my death would be more convenient than painful. That was when my sadness finally shifted into something else clarity. The kind of clarity that makes even pain feel like purpose. The next morning, I called Raymond again. "It's time to finish the paperwork," I told him. He came over that evening with a briefcase and his usual amused expression. "You sure you're ready for the performance's final act?" he asked. "More than ready," I replied. We sat at the table, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over the documents. I reviewed every line of the fake will. Every word was placed like a chess piece. Then I asked him to add one final paragraph. "To the one whose love does not waver in the shadow of loss, everything I own shall belong." He nodded, smirking slightly. "You really were a poet trapped in a mechanic's body." "Poetry is just truth with patience," I said. When he left, I placed the sealed envelope in the desk drawer and locked it. It wasn't money that mattered. It was meaning. The following week was the hardest to watch. Claire grew impatient, snapping at small things. She complained about my pills cluttering the counter. She said the house felt heavy with me there. One night, she whispered to my son, unaware that I could hear through the thin walls, "Mark, if he's really dying, we should get the lawyer involved before things get messy." He mumbled something I couldn't catch, but I heard the exhaustion in his voice. They were tired of pretending. That's when I knew the test had gone on long enough. It was time for the truth to reveal itself in daylight. I called a family meeting the next morning. The air in the living room felt brittle. Claire sat with her legs crossed, scrolling her phone until I began to speak. "I've been thinking," I said slowly. "If I don't have much time left, I want this family to go through this month together. A full month, no excuses. Just us, as family." Claire froze mid-scroll. "A whole month?" "Yes," I said. "If love means anything, it should survive 30 days under one roof." My son looked uncertain, but Ethan cheered. "Yes, Grandpa stays with us." That sealed it. Claire couldn't refuse without looking heartless in front of her son. She forced a smile and said, "Of course, we'll take care of you." And just like that, the countdown began. 30 days. 30 chances to reveal who they really were. The first week was polite discomfort. Claire played hostess, cooking meals and talking about keeping things positive. My son stayed quiet, trying to hold peace. Ethan was the only one who acted naturally. The second week, the cracks widened. Claire grew irritated. The meals got smaller, her tone sharper. My son started working late again. The third week was pure exposure. Claire avoided me completely, leaving notes instead of words. "Take your medicine. Don't use the dishwasher. Keep the curtains closed." But Ethan, dear boy, began visiting every night. He'd tell me stories, bring me water, ask about my childhood. He became the soul of that house without realizing it, and I wrote everything down. By the time the 30th day arrived, I had my decision. The fake will was ready. The letters were sealed, and I had planned the perfect setting for the truth to come out. Dinner. I asked Raymond to deliver the envelope that evening, right when dessert was served. When the knock came at the door, Claire opened it with a suspicious glance. "Delivery for the family," Raymond said, disguised as a courier. He left before they could ask questions. My son opened the envelope. His eyes widened. "It's Dad's will," he whispered. Claire nearly jumped. "What? Already?" He nodded. "It says the estate will go to the one who showed unconditional care in his final month." Silence. Claire's lips parted slightly. "Well, that's obviously us," but my son hesitated. "Is it?" Before they could argue further, I spoke. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "The decision has already been made." They turned to me, startled. I pointed to the small sealed box on the table. "The truth is inside." Inside that box was another envelope, this one addressed in my shaky handwriting. And that, I told them, was where everything would begin and end. When I handed my son that small wooden box, I felt no triumph, only calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally accept the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge screams. Justice whispers. They stared at the box like it was alive. Claire folded her arms. "What is this? Another one of your riddles?" I smiled faintly. "In a way, yes. But it's one I wrote so no one could cheat on the answers." Ethan leaned closer, curious. "What's inside, Grandpa?" "Truth," I said simply. And truth always waits for the right eyes to read it. I told them the box was to remain closed until morning. The instructions were clear. Open it at breakfast, when the light was honest and no one could hide behind shadows. Claire rolled her eyes, but she agreed. My son nodded silently, caught between guilt and confusion. That night, I heard them arguing in whispers. "He's manipulating us," Claire hissed. "He's dying," my son replied. "Maybe he wants closure." "Closure doesn't need secret boxes, Mark," she shot back. Silence followed, then the sound of footsteps, his, retreating to the living room. He slept on the couch that night. I sat awake until dawn, listening to the wind move through the trees, the faint creak of the house settling, and the quiet breath of a child sleeping 2 rooms away. Ethan's innocence was the only thing that made the coming storm worth it. When morning came, I was already seated at the table. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, slicing across the wood like golden blades. The box sat in the middle, small and unassuming, as if unaware of the weight it carried. Claire arrived first, still in her silk robe, phone in hand. My son followed, rubbing his eyes. Ethan trailed behind, carrying his toy truck. "All right," Claire said briskly, sitting down. "Let's get this over with," I nodded. "Go ahead. Open it." My son lifted the lid. Inside were 3 envelopes, each marked with a name. One for him, one for Claire, one for Ethan. "Read them in order," I said. "Start with yours, Mark." He opened his letter. His voice trembled as he read aloud. "My son, you were born from my hands and hope. You inherited everything I worked for, but somewhere along the road, you forgot that work means more than wealth. You stopped fixing things, not machines, but people. You stopped listening to the sound of broken hearts. That was the first tool I ever gave you. And you lost it." He paused, swallowing hard. I could see shame rising in his face. Claire shifted uncomfortably, tapping her foot. "Keep reading," I said quietly. "This past month was never about death. It was about life, yours, mine, and the one you're teaching your son to live. I watched you choose convenience over compassion, silence over truth. You didn't fail me because you stopped loving me. You failed because you stopped trying." He stopped again. "Dad, what is this supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what it says," I replied. "Finish it. The will you found was real only in intent. What's written there was meant to measure your heart, not your greed. I wanted to see whether the boy I raised still existed beneath the man who forgot." He set the letter down, unable to continue. His eyes glistened, but tears never fell. He had learned to live without them. "Now you," I said to Claire. She hesitated, then tore open her envelope. "Claire, when I first met you, I hoped your sharpness came from ambition. I mistook arrogance for strength. But true strength doesn't humiliate, it heals. You've mastered appearances but forgotten substance. You decorate your home like a palace but treat the hearts inside it like disposable furniture. Her jaw tightened. How dare you? Keep reading, I interrupted. You've told people I'm a burden, a weight, a cost. But you should know. You've never carried me. I carried you from the moment I trusted you with my son, with my home, with my grandson. And now, after watching how you've treated the vulnerable, I understand what kind of queen you've built your kingdom to serve. Only yourself. Claire's voice cracked slightly as she read the final line. There is no inheritance for cruelty. Not in this house, not in any house I ever built. She slammed the letter down, her cheeks red with fury. You're insane, she said, standing up. You're punishing us for not worshipping you. No, I said softly. I'm rewarding honesty. Yours just revealed itself sooner. Then I turned to Ethan. Your turn, kiddo. He looked at me, uncertain, then slowly opened his envelope. His small fingers trembled as he unfolded the paper. His voice was soft but steady. Ethan, my light, you saw what others couldn't. You shared what others wouldn't. You reminded me that love doesn't vanish, it hides in the hearts of the brave. You have that courage. You gave it to me every time you smiled, every time you shared your juice, every time you saw me instead of what I couldn't do. Because of that, you will inherit everything I own not as a reward, but as proof that kindness has value. The room went still. Claire's eyes widened. What? My son blinked, stunned. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm very serious, I said calmly. The legal documents are already with Raymond. Ethan's name is on the trust. You and Claire will remain his guardians, but every asset, house, savings, business will belong to him when he's of age. Claire stood frozen for several seconds before the words erupted out of her like steam. This is absurd! You're leaving everything to a child? A child who can't even spell inheritance? I smiled faintly. He doesn't need to spell it to understand it. He's already lived it. My son looked down, defeated. His voice was low. Dad, why would you do this? Because you both needed to remember what family means, I said. It isn't measured in property, it's measured in presence. And when I was weakest, only your son stood by me. That's not his fault, it's your reflection. Claire stormed out of the room. My son stayed seated, staring at the letters spread across the table. The paper fluttered slightly under the ceiling fan, as if breathing with the weight of everything unsaid. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I know, I replied. You just forgot how not to. He nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. He reached across the table and took my hand, the first real touch between us in months. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the boy who once worked beside me in the garage, asking how spark plugs worked, smiling when I handed him tools too big for his hands. Can I fix this? He asked quietly. Start with him, I said, nodding toward Ethan. Teach him what not to become. That night, the house was quieter than ever. Claire locked herself in the bedroom. My son sat outside with a drink, staring into nothing. Ethan climbed onto my lap as I watched the sunset fade through the window. Grandpa, he whispered, why is Mom mad? I chuckled softly. Because sometimes truth feels like fire before it feels like light. He thought for a moment. But fire can make things warm too, right? I smiled. Exactly, kiddo. You're smarter than all of us. He giggled, then leaned against my chest. I could feel his heartbeat, a small, steady drum that reminded me of Helen's voice when she used to hum at night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. Later, I went to my desk and wrote one final entry in my notebook. Justice is not about making others hurt. It's about reminding them what hurt feels like when it's been forgotten. Today, I did not punish. I mirrored, and the mirror spoke louder than words. I closed the book and placed it beside Helen's photograph. The storm had passed. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, gossip, perhaps anger. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't care, because my purpose had already been served. The lesson was written, the inheritance had meaning, and the only person who saw the truth in time was the one pure enough to carry it forward. The next morning arrived, dressed in silence. Even the air felt cautious. Claire didn't speak to me at breakfast. My son moved slowly, as though gravity itself had doubled overnight. Ethan, unaware of the storm he'd inherited, hummed softly as he buttered his toast. By noon, Raymond arrived at the house carrying a leather briefcase. He was punctual, as always, and his expression said everything. The performance was over, and the world was about to see its final act. He greeted us in the living room, removing his hat politely. "Morning, everyone. I trust you all received the letters?" Claire shot him a glare. "We received insults, not letters." Raymond smiled faintly, unbothered. "Insults, Mrs. Carter, are simply truths we haven't accepted yet." My son sighed, rubbing his temples. "Can we just get this over with?" Raymond nodded, opening the briefcase. He spread out a neat pile of documents on the table. "This," he said, tapping the top sheet, "is the official trust deed. Signed, notarized, and filed. Mr. Carter here," he nodded to me, "has transferred all holdings, accounts, and property to a custodial trust under Ethan's name. You two will serve as joint guardians until he reaches 21. Claire's jaw dropped. "This is madness. You can't expect me to live like a servant in a house that belongs to a child." Raymond adjusted his glasses. "You misunderstand, Mrs. Carter. The house doesn't belong to a child. It belongs to his future." Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "You can't do this to us." I stood, slowly, leaning on my cane. "No, Claire, you did this to yourself." The words hung in the room, heavy as thunder. She stared at me, her anger morphing into disbelief. "You lied to us. You made us believe you were dying." "Yes," I said softly, "and in a way I was. Just not in the way you thought. I was dying of neglect, of invisibility, of watching my own family forget how to love. So I gave you a chance to remember." My son looked at me, guilt shadowing his face. "Dad, you could have just told us." "I did," I replied. "In every small silence, in every lonely dinner, in every morning you passed me without a word. But you were too busy listening to everything else." He lowered his gaze. Claire crossed her arms, pacing like a trapped animal. "You can't humiliate us like this in front of a lawyer." "I'm not humiliating you," I said. "I'm freeing you from pretending, from politeness, from the illusion that love exists without responsibility." Ethan tugged at my sleeve, his voice small. "Grandpa, are they in trouble?" I smiled gently. "No, buddy. They're just learning." Raymond began reading the terms aloud. Claire's face reddened with each line. She interrupted halfway through. "And what are we supposed to live on while this so-called trust sits waiting for him to turn 21? I replied calmly, "You'll live on what you've always lived on, my generosity. Only now it comes with conditions." Her mouth fell open. "Conditions?" "Yes," I said, looking at both of them. "You'll remain in this house as guardians. Rent-free, debt-free. But if you fail to provide a nurturing environment for Ethan, the trust immediately transfers to charity." She laughed bitterly. "You think you can control us from the grave?" "I don't need to control you," I said, my voice steady. "You'll control yourselves once you realize who's watching." Her expression shifted. "You mean him?" she said, glancing at Ethan. "Yes," I said. "He's the one who'll remember everything. Every word, every tone, every moment of kindness or cruelty. You wanted a legacy? You just found it." Raymond finished reading and gathered his papers. "Everything's official. I'll deliver the copies this afternoon." He looked at me, his eyes warm. I've seen justice written many ways, but rarely this clean. After he left, the silence returned thicker this time. Claire stormed into the kitchen. My son remained seated, staring at his hands. Finally he spoke. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied. "Just live differently." He nodded slowly. Maybe this was what I needed. A mirror. "That's all it ever was," I said softly. A mirror. That evening the house felt lighter. Claire stayed in her room, refusing dinner. Ethan ate with me, chatting about school and friends and the toy truck that had somehow survived his adventures. My son joined us halfway through, quiet at first, then gradually finding his voice again. After we ate, I went to the porch with a cup of tea. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange light, the same shade Helen used to love. My son followed, sitting beside me in silence. After a long pause, he said, "I read Mom's old journal last night. She wrote about how proud she was of what you built, how much she wanted me to protect it. I failed that, didn't I?" I looked at him. "You lost sight of what it was you were supposed to protect. It wasn't the house, Mark. It was the heart inside it." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I'll fix it, Dad, I swear." "I believe you," I said. "But make sure Ethan does too. He's watching everything now." Later that week, Claire tried one last time to sway me. She found me in the garden, where I was pruning Helen's roses. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I can be better. I can help." I kept trimming the roses, not looking up. "You can't fix a broken bridge by painting over it, Claire. You have to rebuild it from the ground." She hesitated. "You really think I don't care?" I finally looked up. "I think you care when people are watching. The question is, can you care when no one is?" She didn't answer. Her silence was an admission, and perhaps the beginning of her awakening. She turned and walked away, her footsteps slow and uncertain. Over the next few weeks, small changes began to appear. Claire started spending time with Ethan in the evenings, helping him with his drawings. My son invited me to join him at the auto shop once a week, to advise on repairs, though I knew it was really to talk. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was movement. Sometimes justice doesn't end with victory. It begins with humility. One Sunday morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in Claire's neat handwriting. "I didn't understand what you were trying to teach. I thought you wanted to punish me. Now I realize you wanted to remind me. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. Thank you for the lesson I didn't deserve." I folded the note carefully and placed it inside Helen's notebook. She would have smiled at that. Weeks later, Raymond called. "Your son transferred a portion of his salary into Ethan's trust account," he said. No legal reason required, just voluntary. I sat in silence, smiling. "Good. Maybe he's learning what investment really means," he chuckled. "You've done more with one lie than most men do with a lifetime of truth." "Not a lie," I corrected. "A story. And stories, Ray, have power when the right hearts hear them." The town soon learned of my miracle recovery. Word spread through neighbors and old friends that I had cheated death. I let them believe it. In a way, I had. I had killed something far worse than illness, the rot of neglect. At the grocery store, people stopped to talk again. Some offered congratulations, others gossip. I just smiled and nodded, quietly amused at how easily people mistake transformation for trickery. Back home, the laughter of a child began to fill the air again. Ethan would run through the backyard, chasing the old dog, shouting for me to come watch. Claire would sit on the steps, sometimes even smiling, and my son would stand by the fence, watching them, his expression softened, humbled, human again. The house that once felt like a waiting room for resentment began to feel like a home. One night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Grandpa," he said, "are you still dying?" I laughed softly. "Not today, buddy," he grinned. "Good, because I'm still building heaven for you." I brushed his hair back and whispered, "Looks like you already did." When I turned off the light, I felt Helen's presence in the quiet. Her warmth, her approval. Maybe justice isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. It simply restores what's been lost, one heartbeat at a time. Months have passed since that morning when the truth finally rose into the light. The house no longer hums with tension. It breathes now. I can hear laughter again, the kind that doesn't hide behind forced smiles. Even the walls seem different, softer, as if they too were tired of holding back resentment. I still wake up early, just as I did when I worked in the shop. Habit doesn't retire, it just changes its tools. Now my mornings begin with the smell of coffee and the quiet chatter of birds outside the kitchen window. Sometimes I sit alone. Sometimes Ethan joins me, dragging his blanket across the floor like a little prince late for court. He's growing fast. He's sharper than his years, kind without effort, and still manages to see light where adults only see walls. Every morning he asks, "Grandpa, are you happy today?" And I always answer, "Happier than yesterday." Because it's true, Claire is a quieter version of herself now. Not broken, but humbled. At first, she avoided me. Weeks went by with only polite greetings, half-hearted smiles. But time has a strange way of sanding down arrogance. She began to linger near me while I worked in the garden, asking small questions. "What kind of roses are those? Do you really think kindness can change people?" I answered her softly, never with accusation. One afternoon, she came out carrying a tray with lemonade and 2 glasses. She sat beside me and said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About being kind when no one's watching." I nodded, waiting. "I wasn't raised to care," she confessed quietly. Everything was competition. Approval was currency. "I thought love worked the same way," her voice trembled. "You scared me, because you saw through me." I placed a hand on hers, the first gesture of forgiveness between us. "Fear fades when you start telling the truth," I said. "You just did." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. That was the real inheritance I wanted to leave her. Not money. Humanity. My son changed, too. He visits the shop every week now. We fix cars together again slowly, with more conversation than noise. The smell of grease, metal, and soap has become the scent of reconciliation. One afternoon, while we were replacing an old alternator, he said, "I used to think success meant not needing anyone." I smiled. "And now? Now I know it means not forgetting who helped you get there." That was enough. I didn't need an apology carved in words. That sentence carried it in its bones. He's a better father now, too. I've seen it in the way he talks to Ethan with patience, with eye contact, with laughter that reaches his eyes. The boy mirrors it back, just as I hoped he would. Sometimes I watch them from the porch, the two of them building something in the yard, Ethan hammering nails crookedly, his father pretending not to fix them too much. And I think, maybe Helen was right. Maybe love doesn't die. It just needs to be reminded where home is. As for me, I've stopped pretending to be sick, but I still let them fuss over me a little. It's their way of making up for lost time. Claire insists on preparing my tea every evening. My son drives me to appointments I don't really need. And Ethan still climbs into my lap with his toy truck and asks questions that sound too big for his age. "Grandpa, were you scared when you thought you were dying?" I think for a moment before answering. No, I was scared when I realized I was forgotten. But that's not the same thing. Being forgotten is worse than dying. It's being erased while you're still breathing. He nods slowly, his small face serious. "I won't forget you." I hug him tightly. "I know you won't. There's a photo on the mantel now. It's the 4 of us taken last week at the park. The sun was behind us, turning our shadows into one long shape that stretched across the grass. If someone saw it without context, they'd think it was a happy family. Maybe it finally is, behind that photo, tucked. Safely into the frame is a note I wrote to Helen. It's done. The house breathes again. The boy carries your light. The son remembers your lessons. The woman you feared would never learn has started to soften. Justice was never about punishment, it was about repair. And we are repairing, piece by piece. Sometimes, when the evening light hits the glass, I imagine she can see it. People in town still whisper about what I did. Some call it clever, others cruel. I don't correct them. Let them choose whichever story helps them sleep at night. The truth is, it wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. Sometimes people need to lose everything they took for granted before they can see what mattered. I learned that love, when tested, reveals its true shape. And family, when humbled, remembers how to be human again. On quiet nights, when the house is still and the wind moves through the trees outside, I sit by the window and think about time. Time doesn't heal everything. It teaches. It doesn't erase pain. It shapes it into wisdom. If I've learned anything from all this, it's that justice without compassion is just another form of cruelty. And forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. Helen used to say that every family is like a garden. It will either bloom or choke depending on what you feed it. For years, we fed ours pride, resentment, and silence. But now, slowly, we are learning to feed it grace. The flowers are finally growing again. I sometimes imagine years from now, when I'm truly gone, Ethan will be grown, perhaps sitting on this same porch, reading my old letters. Maybe he'll have children of his own. Maybe he'll tell them, "My grandpa taught me what love looks like when it fights to survive." And if they ask how, maybe he'll smile and say, "He pretended to be dying to bring us back to life." That would be enough of a legacy for me. So now, as I sit here under the evening sky, I turn to you, the one listening to my story. You've heard every word, every silence, every choice that led to this moment. Now I ask you something from the heart. What would you have done in my place? Would you have fought back, stayed silent, forgiven sooner? Or would you, like me, have built a lesson strong enough to outlive the pain? Tell me what justice means to you. Comment below. Like this video if you believe kindness is the real inheritance, and subscribe for more stories that remind us sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free.